Now, of course, what everybody's watching right now is the meltdown in the equities market, the share market, the stock market. But it seems to me there's another component to this, which is the bond market. And how much of what's going on here is not just about reshoring manufacturing, but also essentially, in a sense, refinancing the American deficit and the terms under which it has to be paid to try and get out from underneath those crippling $1 trillion a year interest payments. And that's before you start to get to any principal on that debt.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent point, and one that's not getting nearly enough discussion over here. The federal government has to refinance. I think it's $10 trillion worth of debt in the next 12 to 18 months, and interest rates right now are pretty high. The 10-year is about 4%, I think, before today, and it's come down pretty dramatically. So yeah, I think you could make the argument that one of the unintended consequences of this, or maybe it was intended, would be lower borrowing costs for the government. There's another thing, as you know, today the value of the dollar dropped pretty precipitously. It dropped a little bit against the Australian dollar and the New Zealand dollar, but dropped dramatically against the Japanese yen, for example. So that helps American exporters. So there's a bunch of different moving pieces, probably to be expected with a complex economy like the United States has. But yeah, I think if you were looking for a silver lining from this today, you'd say, well, maybe it's cheaper to refinance the debt, and that will save the American government a little bit of money.
Hey, I want to move on to some other issues because there is other big stuff to talk about here. And I want to talk about the recent revelations from Ron Klain, the former Biden chief of staff, who, guess what? In a new book called Uncharted, How Trump Beat Biden, Harris, and the Odds in the Widest Campaign in History by Chris Whipple, well, apparently Klain actually viewed Biden as out of it and even half-seriously worried that Biden thought he was president of NATO. This is, quite a shocker because look at this exchange from the White House with Klain telling the press to leave a room back in 2021.
Now we're going to get down to business here, and Ron, who am I turning this over to?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. I think it's time for the press, our friends in the press to leave, though. Thank you.
So Klain had in August, as recently as August, said that, Biden had been absolutely up to the job. We saw from that clip he obviously wasn't. Why are so many former Biden aides now coming out to cover themselves on this whole question of Biden's compos mentis status?
Yeah, well, I think the short answer is to cover their own rear ends as the Democrats continue to try and cast blame as to who's responsible, essentially for Donald Trump winning. They don't believe Donald Trump won. They believe that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden lost. But, as a former chief of staff, this one stuck with me because, look, the guy who wrote that book is very credible. The guy that wrote that book, Chris Whipple, is the foremost sort of author when it comes to the office of the chief of staff. He wrote the definitive book on the office of the chief of staff. So I know he's got a very close relationship with Klain, or I expect that he does. And for Klain to come out and say that is befuddling to me as a former chief of staff. Essentially what he says is, I'm admitting that I lied to you. I lied to everybody. I knew that he was out of it, and I lied to everybody. And that is a real problem when it comes to faith in government, faith in the institution and so forth, the credibility of that chief of staff's office. So, yeah, look, I know Ron a little bit. It's a very small group of people who've been chief of staff to a president. But for a chief of staff to come out and say the president wasn't there and I didn't do anything about it, in fact, I lied about it to the other extreme, is troubling.
Well, it is troubling because it makes it feel like this is really, I've been called a conspiracy theorist. I was called a conspiracy theorist for so long, saying, Joe Biden is just fine. You're just making up stuff. And now everybody has said, you were right. I mean, now it seems like when you start to do this, people will believe the most seemingly unlikely things, that aren't true, not just things that are true, like, Joe Biden was losing it.
And look what the credibility of the media is. One thing I love about this show is you guys shoot it straight, and I've always appreciated that. But the credibility of the media here has gone down so dramatically because of the Biden competency and capabilities issue. Imagine 3 presidents from now, right now, if you had a truly disabled president and the left-wing media went on and said, we think this person is incapacitated, who would believe them? I mean, they were asleep at the wheel for several years. Going back, keep in mind, you and I first talked about this in October of 2022 when Joe Biden started asking for dead people at press conferences. Everybody knew about this, and there was a huge cover-up. And to have the chief of staff of the president come out and essentially say, yeah, we covered it up, and I lied to you about it, that's troubling.
Hey, speaking very quickly, Mick, of future presidents, Vice President J.D. Vance has suggested that he might run in 2028, but only after he consulted with Donald Trump. Where do you see J.D. Vance right now in the likely successor stakes?
Yeah, I think he's on the short list. There's no question. But Trump got asked this exact question and said, look, we'll see. And that's just how Donald Trump works. J.D. Vance has been doing a really good job. I like the guy. I didn't know him very well. He hadn't been in the Senate very long when he got moved over to the vice president's office. But it doesn't surprise me that Donald Trump is not giving anybody his full-throated endorsement for 2028. Goodness gracious, man's only been in office 3 or 4 months. So, look, J.D. Vance is on the list. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the governor of Arkansas, used to work for Trump in the first administration, is on the list. There's a lot of really good, talented, young Republicans that Donald Trump is going to wait and see on before he makes a decision or who he's supporting in 2028. We're a good ways away from that yet. That race doesn't really start until after the midterms in 2026.
No, look, I know you're right about that, but it's never too early to start talking about it because the Republicans, as you suggest, do have a pretty good and deep bench there. Mick Mulvaney, thank you so much for your time, as always.